What's up everybody, my name is Carl, and today I'll be ranking and rating every current MCU film. I teased this a while back, but I think it's time to do this. I know we still are expecting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and the Marvels, but if I delay this any further, there'll be 100 films for me to rate, and I don't want to wait till then. With there now being 31 films, my opinions and views on certain films have changed, and not everything is a 9 out of 10, which is more or less what I would give a lot of the films after watching them. As well as this, I have not reviewed or rated any of the Phase 1 and 2 films, so it's a good opportunity to do this. I should also mention how my ratings work, so if anything is a 1 to 4, it's bad. If it's a 5 to 7, it's average. If it's 7.25 to 8, it's great. 8.25 to 9 is good, and 9.25 to 10 is amazing. With that out of the way, let's begin with Phase 1, starting with the film that started it all, Iron Man. No matter your stance, this film is going to be important as it kickstarted the MCU. This is the foundation. The beginning. Overall, I think it's a great origin story. Robert Downey Jr. is the sheer embodiment of Tony Stark. I love the character development, and Jeff Bridges as the Ironmonger was great. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10, a great start. I'd say a lot of people don't like this film and rank it pretty low, but it's really not as bad as people claim it to be. I admit amongst the rest of the projects it's pretty forgettable and bland, but on its own, it's not that bad. I think Edward Norton did a good job as Banner, although I think Mark Ruffalo probably does a more convincing job of it. I definitely liked the design and version of the Hulk we get in this film, acting like a proper animal. Of course, in later films the character has to develop, so granted we aren't going to get this version of Hulk forever. Unless they do World War Hulk. Overall, I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. It's an okay watch, but amongst the rest of the MCU, it's kind of forgettable. Sequels can be a hit or a miss, and I think personally, this is more of a miss. I don't really care too much for Whiplash, probably a villain that I have more or less forgotten. You could pretty much skip this film if you really wanted to, and I don't think it would impact much. I would say on the positives that it did provide us with some pretty iconic moments. Crucially, that briefcase armor suit up was awesome, and one of the coolest moments of the MCU. Let's not forget that this is the first time we're introduced to Don Cheadle as Rhodes, and also as War Machine, and that pretty cool final fight he had with Tony was amazing. I'm also giving this one a 7 out of 10. I could probably watch this more over The Incredible Hulk because of some iconic moments, but yeah, it's probably one I'd skip. I think this is a pretty decent film in Phase 1, a good introduction to Thor and also Asgard. I like how Thor learns what it means to be a king, to be a leader, and Odin seriously humbles the guy by banishing him to Earth. I think Loki is a great anti-hero, and you can certainly begin to appreciate where his mischievous but likability started. I'd say overall it's a great watch, and one I could certainly enjoy watching if it ever comes on TV, but it's certainly not one that I'd instantly want to watch, and therefore I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. The first film really perfectly encapsulates Cap, not a perfect soldier, but a good man. I never thought I'd enjoy the Cap films, but this was a pretty good start. The fight scenes and development of Steve Rogers was fantastic, and the Red Skull wasn't a bad villain, he just felt a bit underutilized. Overall, I'd give Captain America the First Avenger an 8.25 out of 10, a pretty good introduction to the iconic American super soldier. Oh, this one is such an easy one. For me, pure iconic. Probably one of the most anticipated and watched films of the MCU. This is the first time our heroes joined together, and it's for sure sheer epicness. The interactions between characters, the use of musical score and action really are satisfying in this. I remember seeing this in the cinema for the first time, and the immense enjoyment felt not only by myself, but from everyone else in the audience was wild. Loki also stepped up in this film as a great villain, and let's not forget that this was the first tease we got of Thanos. Overall, The Avengers gets an easy 9 out of 10. It's pure nostalgia now, but it's definitely a good time. Hot take? but I low-key really like Iron Man 3. I think out of all of the MCU films, it's pretty underrated. I guess it being released in spring doesn't make sense as this film is set during Christmas, and I can also understand people not liking this film because of the fake Mandarin, but if you get past this, it really shows great character development for Tony. This film deals with PTSD and coming to terms with it. As well as this, it takes Tony away from his fancy life and gadgets and brings him back down to reality. I love the final act of the sequence with the different various Iron Man armors we see, and Tony coming to terms with his issues. I'm giving Iron Man 3 overall a 7.75 out of 10. It's underrated, and if you didn't like this film when it came out, please give it another chance. Yeah, this one is going to be really easy for me because I did not like this film one bit. If you heard the stories about this film not being good, then they are indeed correct. I don't personally have a problem with them exploring romance in this film. I guess it would for sure show development between Thor and Jane. It's just everything else that came along with it. I'll be honest, I can barely remember this film, and I could guess that it's a bad thing. Maybe I have long-term memory loss, or maybe this film just sucked. I think both are probably true. The villain was pretty forgettable. The aesthetic of this film was really bland. I don't think this story was well done, and I seriously think Loki was probably the strongest part about this film. It just didn't capture the same energy as the first Thor film, and overall I'm giving it a 4.5 out of 10. Who would have thought that the MCU would bring together a team of heroes that frankly I've never heard of before and make them some of the most likeable characters? I think the story is fantastic. The use of 60s and 70s music is brilliant and certainly captures a vibe, and also the various characters we get in this film is great. The whole film is centered around loss and belonging, and I feel like it's told very well. I also want to add how good it looks visually too, as we get to explore various worlds in space. I would say that the downfall of this film would probably be Ronan, the antagonist of the film, but I don't think he is as forgettable as the antagonists of Iron Man 2 and Thor: The Dark World. Overall, I'm giving Guardians of the Galaxy a 9 out of 10. Oh boy, this is one of those films that stands the test of time. It is perfect. The Winter Soldier is effectively one of the best MCU films to date. There's no ridiculous costumes or quippy one-liners. This is the MCU's thriller, the corruption of the world that Captain America has to deal with. It was certainly a twist to discover that Hydra were amongst the S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives, and this film for sure felt tense and gritty. The fight sequences were darker and most definitely hardcore. You could really tell that the MCU wanted to be taken seriously, and they certainly achieved that. This film is about corruption for sure, but also broken relationships, and boy, Steve certainly does experience this, especially when he finds out Bucky is alive and working for Hydra. What I also like is how it gives certain characters a chance to shine. They really make Cap a grounded real person. They allowed Black Widow and Nick Fury to have some really stellar moments, and how cool was it that we got to see the Falcon debut in this? Yeah, I really do like this film a lot. It's definitely one you can enjoy and be thrilled by. I'm giving this a 9.75 out of 10. Personally, I feel like this film also gets some unnecessary hate. It's actually a pretty good film. I admit it doesn't quite capture the magic the first Avengers film does. It feels kind of clinical in comparison, but Ultron sure does manage to capture the sinister intent and really gets under your skin. Ultron definitely was a stronger villain than Loki, and I guess one that I wish we could see again in the future. I think his arc in this film was satisfying, but they could have gone further. I thought the Avengers team was as great as ever, and I feel as if everyone's costume designs were far better and stylish. I guess this film was the anchor for the next couple of films in this series. We also got introduced to Vision, Wanda and Quicksilver. Well, for Quicksilver it was pretty short-lived. Overall, I'd give Age of Ultron an 8.5 out of 10. It's still pretty good, some cool fights and characters and a badass villain, but it just doesn't feel as special or quite capture the magic of the first film. I briefly mentioned this film in my Quantumania review, and it still is for sure a fun, creative and unique film within the MCU. It's pretty much our first proper heist film, and the fact it's centered around the Ant-Man world is pretty cool. I love the clever use of the shrinking technology and seeing things from the Ant-Man perspective. You really feel as small as him. I think the cast in this film is really likeable and everyone seems to have really great chemistry together. I could for sure happily watch this film again and be satisfied with its overall outcome. The story is very linear, we have some very fun and creative visual effects, and even Yellowjacket as the antagonist was pretty decent. Overall, this film still gets an 8 out of 10. More or less onto the films that I started to review on my channel. I think my opinions have stayed the same on most of these, but I guess the ratings have changed. Man, this film was basically Avengers 2.5, and what a film it was. Absolutely mind-blowing. It was one of those you had to be there type of moments. I'd for sure say that this is peak MCU. This is a great follow-on from Winter Soldier, following on corruption but also consequences and friendship. I have to say, at this point in time, Captain America has definitely got the best trilogy. This film gave us some amazing moments. In fact, I'd say more or less everyone in this film had their special moment to shine. I really loved the drama and tension between Steve and Tony. Even almost 10 years on, I'd have to still say I am Team Iron Man. They were visually the cooler side, but I think everyone low-key supported Cap, and we all knew he was in the right. I also want to shout out Zemo, who by the way was the cause of the Avengers breakup, leaving everyone fragile and divided, a villain that actually succeeded in what they wanted to achieve. Overall, Civil War gets a 9.5 out of 10. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but this film for sure has the coolest visual effects. I love how trippy and weird this film is with its visual effects to portray the mystical world. I really grew to like Stephen Strange in his first outing. The storyline and origins were pretty good. I reckon he's definitely got the potential to perhaps be one of the most powerful heroes we've had so far in the MCU. I think it was pretty cool how we got Dormammu and that iconic sequence.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
What I will say is that amongst the great cast, straightforward storyline and fun visual effects, is we had a pretty generic villain, KAAYALL. He was your run-of-the-mill antagonist who was basically the exact opposite to Strange, but still, it didn't impact the film in a poor way. Overall, I enjoyed Doctor Strange and I'm giving it an 8.25 out of 10. Yeah, this film was a ton of fun and massively stepped up from the first film in quite a lot of ways. I'd say the use of colours in this film are more vibrant and lush, which we certainly got to see a lot of on Ego. Speaking of which, was a pretty decent antagonist played by Kurt Russell. I feel like the themes so far in the Guardians films have been so consistent and deep, but they convey it in such a meaningful way that translates well on screen. This time around it's more about father figures and role models. I think Yondu was certainly the standout in this film, which was both bittersweet as of course he dies by the end, but he certainly had a great redemption arc. I would still rate the first Guardians film slightly higher as this film does have that predictability and more of the same from the crew, which doesn't mean that this film is bad in any way. Overall, I'm giving this an 8.5 out of 10. This film meant a lot to me when it came out, and it certainly met my expectations. I think having Spidey in the MCU was probably one of the best decisions Sony made. Homecoming is such a satisfying watch. I like a lot of things about it. I think we have a pretty decent cast, almost John Hughes in nature. Tom Holland does a fantastic job as playing a high school Peter Parker / Spider-Man. I really like the tough love situation we get from Tony as his mentor, and goddamn, how good was Michael Keaton as the Vulture? I really liked how they modernised the Vulture in this. I'd say he's a pretty underrated villain too. I don't have much to complain about with this film. Overall, I'm giving this an 8.5 out of 10. I personally think that this is the best Thor film we've had and quite possibly will have. I'm glad Taika Waititi put new life into Thor and giving him more personality. I certainly think that this film balanced the comedy and action well, which is probably something I can't say about Love and Thunder. I thought the brotherhood between Thor and Loki was really great. I loved seeing Sakaar, the battle arena world, and not to mention the return of the Hulk. I thought Hela was a great villain. I sort of wish though that we had more sequences with her. Aside from this, I would happily watch this film again as it freshened up Thor. Overall, I'd give this film an 8.75 out of 10. This film is so important. It's the first black superhero-led film we had, and it's certainly a historical and unforgettable film. I think Chadwick Boseman really did embody the role of T'Challa and really made it his own. Even now, he has still left an impact. I certainly enjoyed exploring the world of Wakanda and how technologically advanced they are. Killmonger as the antagonist was fantastic. Yes, I guess by the end it became kind of generic, being the exact opposite to T'Challa, but damn, you really felt his betrayal and anger in this film. I certainly enjoyed the themes of the film, such as corruption, betrayal and fathers, which is what both our protagonist and antagonist lost, and also how T'Challa develops and grows as a character, understanding that the outside world and the truth is not all that it's cracked up to be. Overall, I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. This is the culmination the MCU was building up to for 10 years. What an absolute spectacle. The hype, the build-up, the tension and the atmosphere of this film is unmatched. This meant a lot to the fans. Thanos was the ultimate antagonist. I love how the Russo brothers put a lot of care and craft into telling his journey and quest of collecting the Infinity Stones. I loved how the Avengers were all divided into different factions to take on Thanos, and we sure had some iconic and memorable sequences. I think Infinity War has one of the most dramatic and tense moments out of all the MCU films we've had, and of course the most shocking jaw-dropping ending. Overall, this is probably one of the best MCU films we've had, and for that, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. I'd say as sequels go, it's pretty standard. It's more or less what we've seen before in the first film, which by the way is not a bad thing, but nothing game-changing. What I did like is how we got to see Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp, and she was for sure the star of the film. She certainly had some awesome fights and really cool sequences. I definitely think they stepped the humour a lot with this one, and it was for sure done right and was certainly needed. Scott's shrinking regulator malfunctioning was comedy gold. I would say that once again we had a pretty forgettable villain with Ghost. Her backstory was sad and tragic, but honestly I don't really care too much about her, and nor do we really get enough time with her. I do have to admit the costume design was pretty cool. Overall, I'm giving this film a 7.75 out of 10. It's great, filled with some crazy action scenes and fun visual effects, but certainly is quite underwhelming in comparison to Infinity War, and certainly feels like filler within the MCU timeline. I don't really think my opinions or views have changed much for Captain Marvel. It feels a lot more like filler than Ant-Man and the Wasp. I liked how we had the 90s setting, the introduction of the Skrulls, and the fact Carol goes on this journey of self-discovery and identity, but I honestly don't care too much about this film. I said in my review that I feel Captain Marvel is more for the next generation of fans, and that's personally fine. I distinctively remember an awkwardly silent moment in the film, and looking over and seeing my friend Sham nearly falling asleep, more or less cemented how this film kind of feels. A bit boring. Overall, I'm giving this a 6.75 out of 10. If this is where the MCU had to end, then I'd personally be okay with this one, because damn, what an epic conclusion. The whole time heist situation was epic, a lot of fun, filled with lots of thrills, shocks and moments. I felt like our main Avengers got their final resolved character arcs, coming full circle from their beginnings. Thanos was for sure an absolute menace, and despite not being the epicenter of this film, he sure gave the Avengers a run for their money. The final battle where everyone who got dusted returned through the portals was and still is one of the best and iconic moments of the MCU. That whole sequence was what the franchise was building up to for years. Overall, I'm giving this film a 9.5 out of 10. I love Infinity War just a little bit more, but I can't deny how epic this conclusion was. Everyone and everything was amazing, and even the 3-hour runtime just seemed to go by so fast. I think this film doesn't get a lot of love that it should. Far From Home is a pretty great watch. I'm still mad that they cut the montage of Peter's to-do list activities and him fighting a mafia crime family in the Iron Spider suit. It definitely would have added to the film and Peter's character development. I do like, however, that they went to various locations around Europe and we got to see Peter and MJ's relationship develop. Mysterio is for sure the standout of the film, and certainly expecting him to be the antagonist was not only expected but also satisfying to watch. He definitely caused some physical and mental damage towards Peter. Overall, I'd give this an 8.25 out of 10. I think Homecoming is slightly better in terms of narrative, but I did still enjoy this one. I think as time has gone by, I've certainly grown colder towards this film, and that's a shame because I do like the character Black Widow. I kind of wish that they made this film after Civil War, as it would have been a heck of a lot more impactful when Natasha sacrifices herself during Endgame, which was still pretty sad, but it would have been more so. I think admittedly Florence Pugh's character Yelena was more of the start of the film than Natasha, which is funny as it was designed more to be Scarlett Johansson's film. I also have to point out another forgettable villain, Ray Winston's Dreykov, who by the way had done the worst Russian accent. An English Cockney man doing a Russian accent did not go well. Overall, I'm giving this a 5.75 out of 10. This was a step in the right direction, and finally we got some Asian representation in the MCU. I'd say in terms of fight scenes, this film for sure had one of the best ones within the MCU. The martial art choreography looked like dancing. I mean, we sort of got that in the beginning of the film with an actual scene. I'd say the only thing I didn't like about this film was probably the final battle with the Soul Sucker. That was probably too much visual effects CGI stuff. It literally hurt my eyes to watch it. It's like they didn't know how to end the film and thought, CGI, yes! Aside from this, I liked the cast, the action and the story. I think the whole themes about honour and heritage were great, and for sure felt like a sibling film to Black Panther. Overall, I'd give Shang-Chi a 9 out of 10. Yeah, this is the only film I never saw in cinema during this phase, and also one that I never reviewed because, well, I just don't care about it. Like, don't get me wrong, it's probably got one of the strongest casts I've seen in the MCU. The cinematography looks pretty rich and high quality, and sure, a few of the visual effects were nice, but that's it. They more or less rushed the character developments and arcs to the point where we don't get to care or like the characters. I think for me, it's when they do a time jump and all the Eternals went their separate ways and they need to be brought back together. It's so rushed and we don't get much time with any of them to care what they've been up to. I think what they were trying to do was think, nobody knows who the Guardians were, so why not give this a shot? But at least with the Guardians we had genuine characters with personalities and flaws. In this, everyone feels bland and one-dimensional. The antagonist, who I've almost forgotten, had more progression than all the Eternals, and that's really saying something. Overall, I'm giving Eternals a 4.75 out of 10. Yeah, this and Shang-Chi were probably the saving graces of Phase 4. Man, I love this film. I've only seen No Way Home twice, and that's because I don't want to ruin the enjoyment of seeing this film. It is so satisfying and everything I've wanted to see currently in a Spidey film. Yes, there's loads of nostalgia, but who cares? It works, doesn't it? We got the return of several iconic villains from the different films, and not to mention the Toby, Andrew and Tom tag team, which certainly was iconic and amazing. Character development and arcs in this film were perfect all round. Tom Holland for sure cemented the role as Spider-Man. I love how he had to learn the true sacrifices of being a superhero and the responsibilities it carries with it. Overall, I'm giving this film a 9.5 out of 10. Yes, some of the visual effects did not look great, and sure, nostalgia really makes up a lot of this film, but we get redemption, we get a dream multiversal tag team, and some epic performances and character development. I really wanted to like this film. When I found out it was going to be a horror film within the multiverse and Wanda was the antagonist, I was so excited, but the end result wasn't as great as what was promised. I don't want to completely slate this film. The first half of this film was great. Strange certainly had a narrative. I loved the weird trippy visuals we get and seeing some cool Doctor Strange magic. Wanda was for sure the highlight and star of this film. I also enjoyed seeing elements of the multiverse too. But man, the second half was a completely different film. As soon as Strange and Chavez get drugged by the tea by Monroe is when the film goes downhill. It just felt really corny, goofy, and the visual effects just went down in quality. I can't forgive Marvel for the horrible third eye CGI that they did. Overall, I'm giving this film a 7.25 out of 10. Loved the first half, multiverse stuff and Wanda, but not the rest. No, I can't do this. I really don't want to talk about this film again, because it's so awful. They really could have done something with Thor, but they removed his filter. I appreciated what Taika did with Thor in Ragnarok, and that the Russo brothers also added onto this, but it's like they took one step forward and then 2 steps back. The humour was taken too far in this film. Every serious moment was broken up with comedy, and it really annoyed me. It kind of begun to get a bit awkward. Yeah, the visual effects were also pretty bad too. The COVID era certainly affected the high quality stuff we got in the past, but I guess also it's down to the studio pushing release dates forwards. I'd say the only good thing about this film was Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher, which we didn't get enough of and who barely butchered any gods. Man, this film was disappointing and over the top. Overall, I'm giving it a 3 out of 10. Putting the whole T'Challa recast aside, this film was good, an emotional send-off for the late Chadwick, and also continuing the legacy that he left behind. Ryan Coogler really did a good job with the things he was given. I can't imagine it to have been an easy task for him to deal with. I thought the film's themes about loss and grief were done really well, and it definitely was felt throughout this film. Even with Chadwick gone, you can still feel his presence in this film. I think Shuri stepping up as a main character wasn't easy, but it was pretty decent. I think Letitia did a great performance, and for sure Angela Bassett was exceptional. I thought Namor was alright as a villain. He certainly won't be one I'd look up to as one of the all-time greatest MCU villains, but at least now he is a part of the MCU. The action scenes were good, the dialogue and performances were fantastic, and this being a tribute to Chadwick was wonderful. Overall, I'm giving Wakanda Forever an 8.25 out of 10. Finally, where we left off last time, not much has changed for me about this film. I'd say my rating has for sure changed. I still maintain Kang was definitely the best thing about this film. I'm sure whatever happens in the future, Kang could be the next MCU big bad. I still liked Paul Rudd a lot in this film, even if it felt less dialed down. I wish they gave the Wasp more to do in this film and actually give everyone proper character development. By this point, I'm hoping we have reached the end of the COVID era of filmmaking. I hope also with release dates being pushed back, allows the films and shows to be better higher quality. Overall, I'm giving Quantumania a 7 out of 10. It wasn't as bad as people claimed it to be. It seems to be that film that will be useful later for references, but yeah, it's pretty average. So in conclusion, those are my ratings for all the current MCU films. It sure was long overdue, but I'm glad I've done it, and I know as time goes on and more films come out, my ratings and opinions may change again, but for now, this is what it is. So comment down below what you thought of my ratings and opinions on the MCU films, and also what your ratings and opinions are too. I'd love to hear them. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!